James didn't just have a pool, he had poured his heart, savings, and 3 years of weekends into creating a backyard sanctuary that made neighbors slow their cars when passing. The azure water of his custom-designed pool glimmered against artfully arranged subtropical plants and a small waterfall he built stone by stone. Recently divorced and finally finding peace, James treasured his private oasis as the one place where the chaos of the world couldn't reach him. Every evening after his shift at the medical center, James would come home, change into swim shorts, and float peacefully under the fading light, watching the stars emerge one by one. His colleagues often asked why he didn't join them for happy hours, but they wouldn't understand how these solitary moments kept him sane. His marriage to Elaine had crumbled precisely because she couldn't comprehend his need for quiet after days filled with other people's emergencies and crises. The neighborhood had always respected his privacy, with elderly couples on both sides who waved politely but kept to themselves. When the Henderson family sold their house after 40 years, James had worried about who might move in, but hoped for the best. That hope evaporated on moving day next door, when he spotted the live, laugh, love sign being carried into the Mitchell household, followed by the unmistakable shriek of children and a woman's voice that somehow carried over the fence, hedge, and distance with uncomfortable clarity. "This yard is just desperate for a pool." The voice declared, loud enough that James, who was enjoying his Saturday morning coffee on his deck, nearly choked. He peered through the artfully arranged bamboo screen to see a blonde woman in designer athleisure wear gesturing dramatically toward the corner of her yard, the corner that directly adjoined his property line. "We'll have to do something about those trees blocking the sun," she continued, pointing to the mature privacy hedge that James had carefully maintained for years. Something cold settled in James's stomach as he watched movers struggle with 3 children's bicycles, a trampoline, and what appeared to be a massive collection of outdoor toys. His sanctuary suddenly felt threatened in a way he couldn't quite articulate. That night, as he swam his usual laps, James couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed peace was about to be shattered. The doorbell rang at 8:13 a.m. on a Saturday. James, still in pajama bottoms and halfway through his first cup of coffee, stumbled to the door expecting a package delivery. Instead, he found Diane Mitchell, sporting a blonde bob and oversized designer sunglasses perched on her head, flanked by 3 children with towels draped over their shoulders and inflatable pool toys in hand. The smallest child was already bouncing impatiently on his heels. "We brought mimosas," Diane announced, holding up a pitcher of orange liquid while stepping forward as if an invitation had already been extended. Her perfume, something expensive and overpowering, wafted into James's home before she could. "I'm Diane, by the way. We didn't officially meet during the move-in chaos." James blinked, still processing the ambush. "I'm sorry, but the kids have been dying to try out your gorgeous pool. Tyler here is practically on the swim team, aren't you, sweetie?" She ruffled the hair of her middle child, who looked thoroughly uninterested in swimming and more focused on the video game in his hands. "I'm not really prepared for guests," James said firmly, tightening his grip on the door. "I work night shifts sometimes, and Saturdays are my recovery days." Diane's smile didn't falter, but somehow grew colder as she tilted her head. "Don't be silly. Neighbors share. Marcus next door said your pool is to die for." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between us, I think Marcus is desperate for an invitation too. Everyone talks about your little paradise back there." "My pool is not a community amenity," James explained, feeling his hard-earned peace slipping away with each second. "And I don't recall giving Marcus a pool tour either." The children, as if on cue, began whining in perfect harmony about the heat. "But Mom promised." The oldest girl wailed, stamping her foot on James' welcome mat. "You said he'd say yes." James felt a headache forming as he glimpsed Diane's husband in their driveway, loading golf clubs into an SUV without so much as a glance toward the unfolding scene. Clearly, this had been planned as her day to handle the kids. "I'm sorry, but the answer is no," James said firmly, closing the door despite Diane's foot inching forward to block it. Through the door, he heard Diane's too loud stage whisper to her children. "Some people just don't understand community spirit. Don't worry, sweethearts. Mommy will figure something out." The ominous promise in those last words lingered with James as he locked the door and returned to his now cold coffee. Peering through his blinds, he watched Diane herd her disappointed brood back across the lawn while texting furiously on her phone. Something told him this wasn't the end. It was just the opening salvo. The following weeks brought a series of coincidences that James couldn't ignore. First, his side gate lock was found broken, the metal hasp twisted as if wrenched with a tool. James replaced it with a sturdier model. 3 days later, that lock too was damaged beyond repair. Probably neighborhood teens, suggested Officer Miller when James called the non-emergency police line. Without evidence of who did it, there's not much we can do. Then James's carefully measured pool chemicals began depleting faster than his usage warranted. The pH levels fluctuated wildly, requiring additional treatments. The final straw came when James, returning from a grueling 16-hour hospital shift, discovered a child-sized water gun lying at the bottom of his pristine pool. That evening, James installed 4 discrete security cameras around his property, carefully angling them to cover the pool area and access points. He mentioned nothing to the neighbors about this new security measure. The footage from the first night showed nothing. The second night, when James worked late, told a different story. At 10:47 p.m., the side gate camera captured Diane dressed in a designer swimsuit and cover-up, expertly manipulating the new lock with what appeared to be a screwdriver and bobby pin. Behind her trailed all 3 children in swim gear despite the late hour on a school night. "Quiet, guys," Diane whispered loudly on the recording. "Remember what Mommy said. This is our secret club." The poolside camera revealed Diane settling into James' custom lounger, pouring herself a generous glass of wine from a bottle she brought, while her children cannonballed into the water, splashing and shouting despite her occasional "sha" warnings. The eldest boy performed a dangerous dive near the shallow end that made James wince as he reviewed the footage. Most disturbing was Diane's phone conversation, captured with surprising clarity by the camera's microphone. "No, it's fine, Lisa. I'm at that neighbor's pool I told you about. The divorce doctor, no, he's working nights again. He'll never know. Honestly, he's that weird loner type, probably grateful for some life in his yard. Besides, finders keepers. If you don't use something regularly, you lose dibs on it." The family stayed for nearly 2 hours, leaving wet towels on the deck furniture and a half-empty bag of chips floating in the water. The next morning, James printed several frames from the security footage and walked next door. When Diane answered, her face shifted from welcoming smile to defensive scowl in seconds. "This needs to stop immediately," James said, showing her the images. "You're trespassing, damaging my property, and putting your children at risk. There's no lifeguard and night swimming is dangerous." Diane's expression hardened. "You're seriously complaining about a few kids enjoying an unused pool? God, this is why everyone thinks you're the neighborhood weirdo." Her voice rose, clearly intended to be heard by anyone passing by. "First your wife leaves you, and now you're harassing a mother for letting her children have some innocent fun." James stepped back, shocked. "My divorce has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with it," Diane cut in, eyes narrowing. "You clearly have issues with families. What kind of person installs cameras to spy on children? I should report you for that." That night, James awoke to an alert from his security system. The footage showed a hooded figure, distinctly Diane's height and build, dumping something into his pool before hurrying away. By morning, the pool was a foamy, chemical-smelling mess that the specialist he called said would cost nearly $800 to properly clean and rebalance. "Dish soap," the pool technician explained, shaking his head. "Someone dumped at least 2 large bottles in here. Deliberate, if you ask me. You got problems with a neighbor or something?" James watched the soap bubbles floating across his once pristine sanctuary and made a decision. This was no longer about inconvenience. It was about reclaiming his home. Ames didn't make his decision alone. After 3 sleepless nights spent weighing his options, he called the one person who had always given him straightforward advice. His sister Eva, a corporate attorney whose take-no-prisoners approach had earned her both respect and fear in her field. "Send me everything," she demanded after hearing the abbreviated version. Within an hour of receiving his security footage, Eva was on a video call, her expression thunderous. "This is beyond ridiculous, James. It's criminal trespassing, property damage, and potentially reckless endangerment of minors. Those kids could drown in an unsupervised pool at night." She shuffled through papers off-screen. "I've drafted a cease and desist letter, but honestly, this type is immune to legal threats. They count on people giving up." "The police weren't much help," James admitted, rubbing his temples. "Because no one's been hurt," yet Eva said grimly. "But it's only a matter of time with those night swimming sessions. You need to think beyond the immediate problem." The next day brought an unexpected ally. Marcus, the neighbor Diane had mentioned, knocked on James' door looking embarrassed. "I wanted to clear something up," he said, shifting uncomfortably on the porch. "I never told Diane anything about your pool. Truth is, I've barely seen it myself, just glimpses over the fence when I'm trimming my hedges." James invited him in for coffee, and Marcus's floodgates opened. "She's been telling everyone you two have some kind of arrangement about the pool, said you were neighborhood friends who share everything. When I mentioned I'd hardly seen you two talk, she said you were just private about your friendship." Marcus looked down at his mug. "I should have said something sooner, but my wife didn't want to get involved in neighbor drama." "Why now?" James asked. Marcus grimaced. "She volunteered our backyard for her kid's birthday party next month. Didn't ask, just told us the date. When my wife objected, Diane said we owed her since everyone else shares." He looked up at James. "We're installing a fence next week." That afternoon, James received a call from the HOA president, Mrs. Caldwell, inquiring about noise complaints regarding late-night pool parties. When James explained the situation, her tone changed completely. "That explains a lot," she said. "Diane has been lobbying the board to require all pool owners to register for a neighborhood access program she's proposing. We thought it was odd, but didn't connect the dots." The final piece fell into place that weekend when James's father, a retired judge, came for his weekly visit. Henry Collins had always enjoyed a swim during his visits, a ritual that helped his arthritic joints. This time, however, disaster nearly struck when the 72-year-old slipped on a small plastic action figure left beside the pool steps. James rushed to help his father up, horrified at how close he'd come to hitting his head on the concrete edge. "What the hell was that?" Henry demanded, examining the superhero figure now in his hand. Later that evening, after ensuring his father was uninjured, James called Officer Rodriguez, who had responded to his previous reports. The officer arrived looking resigned. "Another incident?" he asked, flipping open his notebook. James showed him the new security footage and the toy, plus the previous incidents. Rodriguez's professional demeanor slipped slightly as he watched the midnight pool invasions. "Look," the officer said finally, "I'm going to be straight with you. These neighbor disputes hardly ever end well through official channels. Civil suits drag on forever. Restraining orders get violated. People dig in their heels." He glanced meaningfully at the pool. "Sometimes the best solution is to change the playing field entirely." That night, sitting beside his father in the emergency room waiting area, Henry had insisted on an X-ray just to be safe. James sipped lukewarm hospital tea and made his decision. "You know," his father said, following James' gaze out the window, "when I was on the bench, I saw countless property disputes. The ones that ended best weren't won by the most aggressive party. They were resolved by the most creative one." "I think I know what you mean," James replied, an idea taking shape in his mind, one that would permanently solve his problem even if it meant sacrificing something he loved. As they drove home under a starlit sky, James looked at his father. "How do you feel about koi ponds?" Henry Collins smiled slowly. "Always wanted one myself. Less maintenance than a pool and harder for uninvited guests who enjoy without permission." By the time they pulled into the driveway, Operation Transformation was already forming in James' mind, a plan not of retreat, but of strategic victory. James didn't just remove his pool, he orchestrated a complete reinvention that would become the talk of the neighborhood for months to come. After researching extensively and consulting with 3 different landscape architects, he selected Hiroshi Yamada, whose portfolio of Japanese garden transformations had won regional awards. Though Hiroshi's quote was significantly higher than the others, his understanding of what James wanted was immediate and instinctive. "You seek not just beauty, but peace," Hiroshi had said during their consultation, sketching rapidly as James explained his situation in carefully neutral terms, and perhaps also a subtle declaration of boundaries. James arranged to take 2 weeks of accumulated vacation time from the hospital, timing it perfectly with Diane's family trip to Disney World, a journey she had announced loudly over the fence to no one in particular, mentioning 3 times that they'd reserved a VIP experience that cost more than some people's cars. The moment the Mitchell's SUV pulled away, Operation Transformation began with military precision. A team of 8 workers arrived within the hour, erecting temporary privacy screens around James' backyard perimeter. Neighbors watched curiously as trucks delivered materials: pallets of specialty stone, bamboo plants of various heights, a collection of Japanese maples with vibrant red foliage, and mysterious wooden crates marked fragile. "It's just a landscaping project," James told curious neighbors who inquired, offering nothing more despite their probing questions. By day 3, the pool had been completely drained, its coast outlined in the yard like a crime scene. Professional pool removers cut through the concrete shell, removing sections piece by piece rather than simply filling it in, a more expensive option, but one that allowed for proper drainage in the new design. "Most people choose the cheapest route," said Carlos, the removal foreman, during a lunch break. "Fill it with dirt and forget it. But you get problems with settling and water collection. This way your garden will have proper foundations." "I'm done with temporary solutions," James replied, watching as the concrete shell of his former oasis was methodically dismantled. Day 4 brought significant excavation as workers created varying elevations across the yard, small hills and gentle depressions that would transform the once flat pool area into a landscape of discoverable spaces and winding paths. A central depression was reinforced and lined, becoming a koi pond exactly 30 inches deep, beautiful and reflective, but deliberately too shallow for swimming. James found himself unexpectedly emotional watching his pool vanish, but Eva's daily check-in calls strengthened his resolve. "It's like breaking up with someone who's bad for you," she told him. "You'll miss parts of it, but you're making room for something better." By the end of the first week, the basic structure of the new garden had taken shape. Hiroshi arrived daily, moving through the space with focused intensity, adjusting the placement of rocks by mere inches, consulting astronomical charts for the precise alignment of the meditation pavilion, and personally selecting each of the koi fish from a specialized breeder. The white and gold one, Hiroshi said, pointing to a particular fish, is called Mizochi, water spirit. He will be the guardian of your pond. The second week brought the details that transformed the raw materials into art. Stone lanterns were positioned to create subtle lighting patterns across the garden at night. A small bamboo deer scarer was installed beside the pond, its rhythmic knocking both meditative and serving as an alert system for any disturbances. Solar-powered security lights were artfully hidden among plants, activated by motion sensors that would flood the garden with light if anyone wandered in after dark. Most impressive was the security system disguised as garden art. Cameras concealed within stone lanterns, motion sensors embedded in decorative bamboo posts, and a state-of-the-art alert system that would send notifications to James's phone if any perimeter breaches occurred. The security consultant, a former military specialist recommended by Eva, ensured everything was legal, ethical, and virtually invisible to casual observation. This isn't just security, he explained to James. It's peace of mind with visual evidence if needed. On the final day, as workers packed up their tools and Hiroshi conducted a final walkthrough, James's father arrived for the unveiling ceremony. The elderly man stood at the garden entrance, leaning lightly on his cane, and shook his head in wonder. "This is something else entirely, son," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Not just different." James was pruning a Japanese maple when he heard the Mitchells' SUV pull into their driveway. He calmly continued his gardening, though he positioned himself to have a clear view of the fence line they shared. Inside his pocket, his phone was already recording audio, a precaution Eva had insisted upon. The first indication that Diane had discovered the transformation came exactly 7 minutes later. James heard the upstairs window of the Mitchell home slam open, followed by a strangled gasp that carried across both yards. "What the? Robert, come look at this right now." James maintained his composure, methodically trimming another branch as heavy footsteps pounded down the Mitchells' back porch steps. He glanced up to see Diane, still wearing Mickey Mouse ears from their Disney trip, standing at the edge of her property, mouth agape as she stared at what had once been a swimming pool. "What happened to the pool?" she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that caused birds to flutter from nearby trees. James set down his pruning shears and straightened up, giving her a calm wave. "Good afternoon, Diane. How was Disney?" Her husband, Robert, appeared behind her, looking more confused than upset. "Hey, what's going on? What happened to your—" "He destroyed it." Diane cut him off, her face flushing red beneath her vacation tan. "He deliberately destroyed it to spite us." She turned to her husband, gesturing wildly. "Do something." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "It's his yard, Diane. He can do what he wants with." No, he can't." Diane was already marching toward James' garden gate, Disney ears askew, designer sandals slapping against the pavement. This is neighborhood sabotage. James had anticipated this moment, had mentally rehearsed it dozens of times, yet the reality of Diane's fury still surpassed his expectations. He walked calmly to intercept her at the gate, which was now secured with a biometric lock that responded only to his fingerprint. "Please don't enter my property without permission, Diane," he said evenly, positioning himself between her and the gate. "I'd be happy to give you a tour of my new garden sometime if you'd like to."